Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about something a little interesting, a green card interview that my clients recently attended. We're going to talk about how the interview went and what some key takeaways would be if you have an interview coming up. So the situation was like this. My clients got married and they applied for a green card in Salt Lake City, Utah. When they went for the immigration interview, the immigration officer started by having them sit down and had the immigrant spouse begin by explaining when they met and to begin creating a timeline of their relationship together. And then the immigration officer stops the immigrant spouse from talking and moves back to the US citizen spouse and says, okay, now pick up from where she left off. And back and forth for about 45 minutes, the interview proceeded. The interview ended up taking about 45 minutes, and the immigration officer asked some pretty clever questions. He asked each spouse what their biggest marital difficulty had been in the last year. One spouse mentioned that their in-laws had created problems for them. The other spouse mentioned that the immigration process and the undue delays in getting the green card and the work permit actually ended up creating the biggest hardships for them. Another question that the immigration officer asked was about their plans for the future. And they each gave slightly different answers, but the answers were consistent, and it was clear to the officer that this was a good faith marriage. 45 minutes later, the immigration officer congratulated them, which doesn't always happen. Sometimes during these interviews, it just ends kind of on a blank note. You don't know how it went. So the immigration officer congratulated them and escorted them out of the interview room. About 2 weeks after the interview, my client's green card arrived at my office, and we were able to have this phone call to debrief so I could see what they thought about the whole experience. And I was a little surprised that their interview lasted 45 minutes. They had so much evidence of their marriage. I thought it was going to be a slam dunk case, but when they went into the interview, they were both still a little nervous. The immigration officer really took his time, really probed each of them. They ended up doing a great job, but in this instance, I believed that the interview would only last about 20 minutes. So in my experience, this was a little bit unusual, but not that far out of the ordinary. The question becomes, what did my clients do right for such a good outcome? Right? There are two main things that they did correctly. First, when we submitted the green card application a year ago, we included a ton of evidence from their relationship. Evidence of travel, evidence they bought a dog together, photos with their friends and family. And then when they went to the green card interview a year later, they brought a ton of updated evidence of their relationship. They had just bought a house together, so they had a ton of evidence. The second thing they did correctly was answering the questions that they knew the answers to. They told me that there were a few questions during the interview that they couldn't answer. They didn't remember the answer, or they just didn't know. And they told the officer, I don't know. And the officer understood and just moved on. That was the correct thing for them to do. The reason I'm making this video is because, first of all, everyone likes to hear about green card interview experiences, but secondly, so that you can really understand that every interview is completely different. You might have weak evidence and end up having a pretty easy 10-minute interview, or you might have a ton of strong evidence and end up having a 45-minute interview like my clients did. Sometimes I'm reading the comments of my YouTube videos and I see people describing absolute nightmare green card interview scenarios. And, the two thoughts that come to mind are, did they submit good quality evidence? And did they really prepare with a lawyer before the interview? If you're doing this whole thing without a lawyer, at least you should speak with a lawyer before you go into the interview, because it could really affect the outcome. If you've gone through this green card process, think back. You remember how stressed out you were. It would help a lot of people if you leave a comment describing your experience. Even if it helps one person, it'll have been worth it. If you're going through this process yourself right now and you need extra support, know that I'm available. You could always reach out to me. All right, guys, I'll see you next week for another video.